Right now, the world isn't just reopening. Humanity is reawakening. It's time to demonstrate who we are at our core. We are resilient humans. We can reimagine a better world, understanding that every action we take today will contribute to a thriving new tomorrow. Let's come together and make a difference for the greater good and the promise of more together days ahead.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's really timely conversation, The Future is Female, which is presented by Deloitte. Today, I have the true pleasure of hosting two incredible panel discussions with executives from a great variety of industries who will share their thoughts on what the future looks like for women leaders in a post-pandemic world. This forward-looking conversation will not only examine what experiences and skills are important for women leaders, and why it's a business imperative to empower them for the future, it will also consider opportunities for changing the systems that have so greatly impacted the retention and advancement of women. Our panelists will offer real-world examples of the hurdles women leaders face and the work that is being done now by organizations to help set women up for success going forward. I'm really so pleased to now introduce Janet Foti, who will set the stage for today's panel discussions. Janet is Executive Chair of the Board of Deloitte US. She is also a member of Deloitte's Global Board of Directors and Chair of the Deloitte Foundation. She is a groundbreaking woman who has previously served as Chair and CEO of Deloitte Consulting. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you so much, Linda, and a good afternoon or good morning, depending where you're joining us from. First off, an enormous thank you to Linda and the Boston Globe for hosting this event and convening this really impressive group. Though we may be scattered around the country, it feels fitting that this event is rooted in the birthplace of the American Revolution as I was thinking about it, because after a long many years, American women are really ready for a new kind of working world and prepared to work and fight for it. So far be it from me to describe myself as a revolutionary. The colonial hats definitely would not be working well on Zoom today. But throughout my career, there were so many times when I was the first woman or even the only woman in a room or on Zoom. And I think any person that's been in that position can tell you it's truly an honor to be the first, but it's far more important to me that I'm not the last. And that's really what today is about. I'm so excited to discuss what an inclusive, successful future for women looks like and how together we can get there. So before we dive into the future, let's go back a year and a half ago, before Zoom and social distancing and mask outfit coordination. In 2019, women made up 50% of the American workforce. And there were signs that things were really looking up, including that the number of women CEOs were at an all-time high. But things were far from perfect. Though the number of CEOs was at an all-time high who were women, they only represented 6% of the total leaders of the Fortune 500. And this is the stat that really continues to catch my attention, we continue to have more men named John or David as CEOs than women CEOs. Women of all ages and races and income brackets were spending a third more time on unpaid housework than men. And of course, women were still paid less than men, especially Black and Latina women. And then COVID-19 happened. Even at the outset, we knew the pandemic would likely grind the economy and our efforts towards equity to a halt. But what we didn't expect was the worst recession since the 1940s, one that didn't just put a pause on women's progress in the workforce, but rewound it back decades. The pandemic put some 5 million American women out of work, a disproportionate number of them women of color. It shrank the pipeline of future female leaders, as well as the number of women in leadership roles today. And while it's been reported the pay gap might decrease this year, it's likely because so many women are losing or leaving paid jobs. What's more, a Deloitte global report found that for women who remained in the workforce, 77% say their workload has increased and they're shouldering more responsibilities managing household tasks and caring for others. Many of them see added complexity as a threat to their career, not to mention their mental health. You know, and I certainly would prefer to forget the antiquated expression, behind every great man is a great woman. Well, unfortunately, behind every great recession is a great she-cession. Without structural, cultural, and personal support, the risk is that women will always be one economic crisis away from unemployment or underemployment or career stagnation. But in so many ways, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Vaccines are here. The world is opening up again. I was just talking with the panelists about just that. And while some fluctuation remains, unemployment numbers are trending down. And women now hold many of the most important jobs overseeing the US economy, and some fresh perspective and new ways of thinking could be quite useful right now as we emerge from this crisis. And though it's tempting to try and return to normal, the truth is normal wasn't working for women even before the pandemic. So as leaders, it's on to us to reimagine a woman's place in the workforce, to redesign work for well-being, to redefine work-life integration. And there are steps every organization can take to get women back through the door, offering increased flexibility in terms of hours and location, creating a culture that both values working women and encourages men to share the burden of caretaking. And then there are solutions, the programs and sponsors and resources that help women not only arrive at the top, but thrive there. Because we all know, the data tells us, the companies that have women in leadership roles absolutely perform consistently better. But how to do that effectively and make sure that women leaders succeed is an under-examined topic. It's one that Simmons University's Lynn Wooten, one of today's panelists, and I are actually exploring together in an upcoming book. So we've been thinking and talking a lot about that. I think the most important lesson we learned from the last year is that if we want to make an impact, we have to work together. That's why events like this one are so important. They offer us the opportunity to learn, to collaborate, to create intersectional solutions across companies and industries, the public and private sector. We have an extraordinary opportunity to turn this rewind into a reset, to help women find and follow their own paths, especially those who are forging new ones, which again, we're going to talk about today, to create not just more firsts, but new norms. I can't wait to get started together. So without further ado, I'll turn it back to Linda to introduce our first incredible panel.
Thank you, Janet. That's really extraordinary data. And I think that's data that we've heard pieces of, but you presenting it all at once is really impactful and a really great grounding for today's conversation as you're identifying where we are at this critical moment in time. And I just want to thank you for partnering with us on bringing this conversation forward.
Truly are, and my privilege.
Oh, great. Thanks, Janet. So our first session will build on these insights and look ahead with the discussion of the opportunity of the female future. So if our panelists could turn on their screens. I'll be joined for our first panel by 4 groundbreaking executives with experience across the business, healthcare, higher ed, and nonprofit worlds. I'm pleased to introduce Sheena Collier, founder and CEO of Boston While Black and the Collier Connection. We're also joined by Dr. Ann Klebanski, president and CEO of Mass General Brigham, along with Lynn Perry Wooten, who just got a shout out from Janet, who is the president of Simmons University, and Andrea Silbert, president of EOS Foundation. Thank you all so much for joining me today. So Lynn, I want to actually start with you. We're talking about the opportunity for women with how they're being prepared in school and the number of different messages that they get. You're leading an incredible women's college here in Boston. What messages are women getting as they start their career?
Linda, that's a great question. I've spent my entire life really be committed to messaging and educating women as they start their career. And when I first joined higher ed, the message was just do what it takes to be successful in your career. It was very singular focus. If you want to be a physician, you want to be an engineer, take the right classes, make the right investments. Fast forward to the last 5 years, and especially the pandemic, we've kind of repositioned that message for the current generation. So as Janet said, that they can really arrive and thrive. One is that we know we're going to live longer, and especially women. And so getting women to think about their career over their life course. At Simmons, we talk about this notion of your lifelong work. And you're going to have to make multiple investments. Linda, we've talked about this. Reinvent yourself, go back to school, get certificates, competencies, all of those type of things. So making these lifelong investments for where you want to go is important. And then this life-wide perspective of your career is we're being more intentional about as we educate women. Your career is not only your professional job, but you may have a second job in the gig economy. We see many of our students now do lots of freelancing. And also, they care about giving back to their community. So there's this parallel path of civic engagement for their career and wanting to give back to their community, especially in this pandemic era where we're thinking about social reckoning and topics of social justice, and election area topics of civic engagement. And then the other one is, there was a model, you get your education and then you think about what type of life you want to have with a life partner, if you want to have children. We're seeing kind of this delayed response now where people are spending longer time, women, investing in their careers, and then thinking more later in their 30s, late 20s, and so on, and being intentional about the timing of when they want to have caring responsibilities. The final thing I want to talk about is we've also cracked this confidence code. All of us know men will sign up for a job, that next promotion, they're quick to sign up for arriving. And they may sign up for a job that only know how to do 25, 50%. But women want to know how to do 90% of something before we even feel confident throwing our name in the interview. And I see Sheena shaking her head. And so as an educator committed to women in particular, we've been thinking a lot about what does it take to make women confident? So kind of over-educating them in some way, giving them the skills to interview, to network, to prepare for those careers, especially careers where they're underrepresented, and making sure they have that personal board of director, that posse, such as a coach, a mentor, and a sponsor, that you can't go solo on this journey is what we're teaching women. So those are some important things, especially as we let them out in the world. Our graduation's in a couple of weeks for this kind of post-pandemic era.
Those are terrific messages. The students at Simmons are lucky. I particularly love the lifelong learning message, that you're not just going to sign up and be done. You have to keep doing that. And Sheena, I think you're a really great example of that, where you were in the nonprofit and corporate world and you started your own company. So you reinvented yourself again after going to graduate school. Can you talk to us about why, what inspired you?
Yes, definitely. And I was nodding my head so vigorously, Lynn, because I'm thinking about the angst that I've had in many roles where I actually often was playing kind of second to a man that I was reporting to, and I would feel like I needed to know everything, and I'm like, oh, they don't. And I think a lot of us have experienced that throughout our careers. I'm very honored to be on this panel of women who have helped to create the pathway for leaders on the rise like me to launch and run our own companies. I did work for over a decade throughout education, nonprofit, and corporate spaces in Boston and DC. And I'm really proud of the programs and initiatives that I was able to launch and the children, families, and businesses that I've been able to impact. However, I did reach this point in my career where I felt like I needed to have more control over my career path, over my salary, over where I worked from, and the business models that I use to get my work done. Linda mentioned in the kind of introduction, I'm the founder of two companies, Collier Connection and Boston While Black. Boston While Black I launched last year as this membership network for Black people who are seeking community and culture. And really our mission is around shifting the way that Black people contribute to and engage with Boston, and really hoping to improve the experience in Boston so we can change the local and national brand of Boston for Black people. And while we actually do partner with a number of corporations and universities to fulfill our mission, including Mass General Brigham, I do strongly believe that the company culture that I want to create, the flexibility that I want in my own life, and the freedom that I need to experiment and be the kind of leader that I want to be, I needed to create that outside of the typical corporate structure. That's
great. And you were just talked about by Sheena. You were, first of all, thank you. I think we should start with that. Your leadership has been remarkable throughout this pandemic. The hospitals that you oversee, how they responded during this pandemic and served our whole community has really just been remarkable. We were talking yesterday about how going through this, you've actually been learning, you and your organization have not just been learning from each other, but you've also been learning from patients. What have you been learning from them?
No, thank you, Linda. And I think, I would just start by saying this is the opportunity to take learnings from a broad array of people, disciplines, voices, and really use that opportunity to move a lot of the things that we've talked about moving forward. So, we're a healthcare system. We learn from everyone, but I would say at the heart of it, we learn the most from our patients. We learn the most from our patients, what they see, what they're experiencing. We've learned so much about the care that's delivered. And I just want to highlight the profound impact of COVID. It's had a profound impact on all of society, on all of us, everyone. But I would say that within the healthcare system in particular, we are seeing impacts that we knew were there before. So, COVID has been really the major stressor. So how many new things have we learned? Not that many totally new things, but it has really enabled us to see things that were always there. But now we are seeing them in a very fundamentally different way. So things that we've learned about healthcare, how healthcare is delivered, who delivers it, where is it delivered, what is the impact on underserved communities, what are the voices of women, all women, women of color, what does that look like? So here are some of the things that we've learned. Women, and we know this, are a group disproportionately affected when there's a time of stress and when there isn't a time of stress. So we think about what it means when we say an appointment is convenient and it's more convenient during telehealth. I've heard that for years. What this has brought out is it's not quote unquote convenience. It's the stress, it's the reality of having to drive 30 miles for an appointment, having childcare taken care of, elder care, orchestrating. It's 100 different things that the word convenience is just a very tiny word to describe an entire phenomena. So this disproportionately affected, we see it all the time through patients. What has been the effect of staying home? What's the effect of not having sufficient childcare? Of having the school system disrupted. So I think there are so many things that we've learned through the healthcare, through the patient lens. Through the career lens, we see this, and I've learned this from patients, from our employees. A long-standing balance of life and work is profoundly disrupted. And we are seeing all of these things play out. So what are the positives here? What are the learnings that we have actually taken to heart? Because if we go back to the old norm and say, such a relief, this is over, can go back to our old life, a profound mistake and failing for all of us. What are the new opportunities that we actually need to push forward on? So I'm just going to name a couple. Flexibility was named early on. Flexibility, what does that mean? If there's flexibility in working from home, for some people, that really is not going to work for them for a number of reasons. But it does also enable flexibility for many in terms of time, in terms of career development. Who are the new teams, the new people you can interface with on video that were not accessible to you before? There's a funny kind of an equalizer that occurs, not always, but often when you're in the virtual world. People can take advantage of that. I'll say in terms of our faculty, and this is something I've seen in patients and their own lives, their own careers, and our own faculty, the ability to travel is often very limited by so many factors. It is so fundamental to so many businesses, to professional advancement. We can now have people travel virtually to other states, to other countries. That's a real career enabler for a lot of people that would not have been possible for many of our patients, many of our employees, but we can do that now virtually. So I would say that there are a lot of possibilities, leveraging technology, trying to think of things as a new way to look at things and not going back to the old patterns. So for us as a healthcare system, profound implications in terms of how we're delivering care, where we're delivering care, bringing care to patients. But I think what we've also learned is the humanity of all of this, the fundamental inequalities haven't changed. But this is an opportunity to take many of those things, leveraging these opportunities, and really drive change. But if we don't do it now, the tendency will be to go back to the old norm. So I would just make those comments, Linda.
Those are, it's great points that you're making in terms of learning, as well as that this is a moment right now. And so this conversation is really helpful. And I think more of these conversations where people are sharing what they're learning and what they're doing. I think one of the things that for all of us as leaders of organizations, figuring out what is the best thing to do for our employees. We have different types of employees doing different things. It's been hard. We're entering this new world, but it's not a new world for you, Andrea. You've been functioning in a this sort of remote way that's new for the rest of us for over a decade.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to start with, I run a philanthropy and we're largely virtual because we had to be because of our talent, and I employ a number of young women who have children. And so I had to be virtual to the point where just before the epidemic, we actually gave up our office space in Boston. We had office space. And I said, I'm always in meetings when I'm in Boston. I have a membership at the UMass Club. I don't need this. So pretty interesting. But what I think is that this is a great opportunity. And I want to pick up on something that Janet said is that, and also Dr. Klebanski mentioned, normal isn't working for women. Normal has never worked for women. So let's just look at what was the normal, quote, normal workplace. And I have a friend who said to me, and I want to shout out to Sheena too, very similar background to mine. Why be normal? Who wants to be normal? So let's start with why be normal. But what is normal? Well, normal in the CEO workplace is hierarchical. Everybody has to show up and have face time to get promoted. Normal lacks flexibility. So why do we want that? That wasn't working, as Janet said before. So what this pandemic has done for us is it's given us an inflection point. It's given us a pause, right? We all got to stop and we got to think. And many of us were extraordinarily stressed, balancing work and family. But we did get to stop. And what we found out is that we are very resourceful and technology helps us. So for instance, at the EOS Foundation, we collaborated with AAUW in DC. We had weekly Zoom meetings with a partner. We were able to take what we did mostly in Massachusetts and launch nationally. And so what is the opportunity that Dr. Klebanski is talking about? If you don't center your employees, if we don't think about a less traditional leadership style, a leadership style that centers employees, that sort of still has some hierarchy, but really understands you're only going to win. Your company's only going to win if your talent is there for you. And the labor market's already tightened. It's going to get extremely tight, especially with women leaving and doing like what Sheena's doing and starting their own things. And they're going to keep doing that. Women are extraordinarily creative. They're not going to just stay out of the workforce. They're going to start their own things. So who's going to win? What's the new leadership style? It's transformational. It is flexible and it's employee-centered. And yes, the future is female. And I will just tell you that young men want the same thing. So when we say the future is female, it applies to men too. They want the same thing. This pause, this pandemic has helped many men stop and say, I want to be there for my kids' soccer games. I want a more flexible work style. And so I think what we're going to have to find and what employers are going to have to find is a hybrid that has some in person, but also uses this great technology for flexibility.
One of the, and I want to open this up for whoever wants to jump in, but finding that balance where you're saying this hybrid where you're able to preserve, so many of us are doing this real work within our organizations to have an inclusive culture where everybody can thrive and do their best work. We're all here to set up our organizations where people can do their best work of their careers there. And so much of that is creating this sort of supportive environment that enables that. And so how do you do this in a way that really is something that benefits women in all stages of the career, as well as people from a variety of backgrounds? I'll open up to whoever wants to jump in.
I'll just start by saying one of the really important things is to define a lot of what we're talking about, success, different things, how things work, by where it is you're going and what exactly you're doing. So I'd say a lot of companies, and that includes healthcare, and I'm not talking about the delivery of care now, have typically judged things by timed meetings, timed things as opposed to what is the work that we're doing and what does that look like? So, certainly within academic pursuits, within academic medicine, there are huge structural meetings and things that happen, and being there and being there and being there at all hours is kind of, that defines you. When I first started out many years ago, people said, well, no, you have to be at every single meeting. You absolutely have to be at every single meeting. And when women couldn't be at the meetings, it was like, well, they weren't at the meetings. When I got into a position where I could say something different, I said, well, but where do the meetings go? Like, what's the result of this? What actually are we trying to do here? So bringing the flexibility that focuses on the product, on what you're doing, on what you're trying to do, rather than the process. And the structures sometimes can be helpful. The other thing I would just say is it is reinforcing the message. And, I've said this a number of times, something I learned as an undergraduate, which is having people view their professions as not their careers. So I think often people are very stuck in, I was trained to do X, and so this is what I have to do. And one of the things that we learned, certainly during the pandemic, was we had people switching roles because we had to. We had people doing things that were absolutely different from what they were doing before. And many people said, well, that's fantastic. I never knew I'd be interested in that. I never knew I could do this. And I think that was really empowering. And I certainly heard from a lot of women who said, I never thought I could do that. I never thought I'd be interested in that. That kind of flexibility and empowerment to kind of think about things differently, I think is going to be very helpful in this pursuit.
So not just flexibility in schedules, but flexibility in roles as well.
Yes, and goals.
Sheena,
and that requires us to have this mindset that leadership happens in many ways. It's not just the person at the top. It's all across the organizational level, and it's looking for these everyday leadership. And when we talk about females in particular and them being the future, it's knowing where and when they can enter and how they can show up. And I want to build on a couple points you said. We all have to look at the way organizations lead and work. And there's sometimes we need to be in person, but there are many times that we don't. And the pandemic has really forced us to rethink that paradigm. I often say to my team, okay, moments matter. And when is the important moments that we need to be in person and when we don't? And then what relationships matter? And whether it's virtual or in person, how are we putting relationships at the center? So equity is important. We're breaking glass ceilings. We're serving our customers and our clients. And then the next component is we do have to think about processes. And, I'm an academic like you. I don't know how many hours I spent in meetings. My kids think that's my profession, meetings. And so we have to think more about processes to be efficient and effective. Some meetings have been great for me, others haven't. And then the final thing is everything we do, we need to ask, especially in the context of the future being female, what are the results we're trying to produce? If we're trying to break glass ceilings, we're trying to make things more equitable, if we're trying to be more inclusive, what does that look like when you talk about processes, moments, and relationships?
Sheena, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, leading something that's much smaller than the other women on the panel, I've thought a lot about, so when you think about kind of to what Ann and Lynn just said, how you actually do those things, like focusing on the product and not the process, I do think that is very much in tension with our very results-oriented culture. So I'll say even for me with a very small team, I'm building a community. So I also want to, for my team, build a community. I want to model what we're trying to build. And I also need things to get done. And particularly in this past year, across my team, I've had a mix of employees and contractors. I would say 90% of people, it's 5 people. So 90% have had multiple people pass away to COVID this year, or are contract COVID and be really sick, or they needed to be out. And as a very small company who literally needs every single person to do their role, there was a lot of compassion that I needed to make sure I had, and a lot of reminding myself that, is the end goal checking off the things you all need to get done, or is it about the community that you're building with these people, which sometimes is in contrast to things I need to deliver because I need sponsors, or and all of that. And I can only imagine leading something much larger, because it caused me a lot of anxiety of really wanting to be and continuing to be a very compassionate leader, and seeing my team as the whole people that they are, and knowing that we are all running things where we are making money. And so, and not the rest of the world doesn't operate like that. So even if I want to slow my work down or give space for people, I also have to deliver to sponsors or other folks. And so I think I'm enjoying listening to you all, and because this is stuff that I grapple with a lot, of where we can change our practices as organizations, but I think the long-term work is changing, like, the overall expectation of what does it mean to produce in this world that we're in. And I think that's long-term work. It starts with the anchor institutions that are here, but it's just something that I think about a lot, because I want to, again, be compassionate in that, and balance that with, we have, deadlines to meet, for example.
Mm-hmm. If I could just comment on Sheena's points, because she's made so many wonderful points here, just a couple of things that come to mind. I think during the pandemic, as no time before, the concept of loss, compassion, community has really come together for people, for families, for organizations. And certainly as a healthcare delivery system, care, compassion, seeing that loss every day has definitely brought all of that forward. But I'd say something, which is one of the things that really happened was, well, there are two things. Number one was all of the changes brought about a consideration about succession planning. Like, what does succession planning look like? It hasn't really been focused on very much. And that led to, who are the leaders? Where are the communities? What are we thinking about within our own organization? So there are two really interesting things that came about. Number one, and this was a surprise to many people, was not really a surprise to me, because as a woman in a healthcare system early on looking for leadership opportunities, it was a pretty small community, but I could tell you who they were. Like, if people said, well, I don't know where the women leaders are, I'd like, well, here are 20. You just don't know about them. So it was identifying the internal communities where people come together within an organization. And then the other thing is, with succession planning, isn't this the time to try and identify those communities, how important they are as communities to develop people, to really have communities within large organizations where you bring together people, you identify future leadership, so that ultimately all the voices that are not typically heard from at higher levels of the organization, suddenly they're there and people know who they are. So I just wanted to use some of those terrific comments that you made to just do a little thinking about what that would mean for any size organization, actually, and the cultures we create within them.
I'd love to jump in on that. I so agree that we need to really think about advancement, succession planning, and we've done quite a bit of research at the foundation through a Women's Power Gap initiative that shows us men are often promoted based on potential and women on experience. It goes back to this. Part of the reason, Lynn, we think we need to know 90% of the job to get the promotion is sometimes we do. And that outsider path, we're looking at 130 of the elite universities in the country. And about 15% of the presidents of those universities took an outsider path. They were members of Congress, they were in the government. Not a single one is a woman. That path isn't available. We have to prove ourselves. What this moment could allow us is to say, FaceTime doesn't count, right? What are the processes we need to put into place? How can we debias hiring, advancement, succession planning? Because women work really hard. Another thing early on in my career, talking to other women, I would say, are you networking? Are you out there? No, I'm working through lunch. Young women in law firms, they work through lunch, they get their work done. And what are the guys doing? They're talking. In fact, I remember I hired a guy who didn't work out at my company, at the Center for Women in Enterprise, which was before EOS. And he just wanted to talk the whole time. And I said, no, you have to get the work done. And so, of course, that's a gross generalization, but we work, we're precise, we have follow through. And I think that how do we, going back to you, Anne, how do we make these advancement process, we can both debias them, but also get away from FaceTime, get away from, of course, and I know, and Linda, we talked yesterday about, especially for young people and young women, they need some in-person, but it should be not something that is an opportunity to get ahead by talking rather than actually doing the work, and having, particularly in meetings as a young woman, somebody else, oftentimes a man, take credit for what you did.
We were talking about the importance of mentorship, particularly early in the career, and how this situation has really sort of frayed some of those informal mentorship bonds that are created. I'm hearing some really fascinating themes, but part of it comes into a new type of leadership, which all four of you are doing in your own organization, where it's a combination of skills that are very different from, I think, the skills that probably each of your predecessors had to, because we're facing these different types of challenges. What does successful leadership today involve that you think is different from before? Sheena, you brought up building community, not just so there's like the task getting done, but community, I don't think would have been as high on previous CEOs' lists.
Yeah, and I've been building my company over Zoom. I've hired everyone in the last year, and so I've had to pay really special attention to how do I make sure these people know each other, how do we know each other's working styles, how do we have compassion for each other, as everyone is going through what they're going through this year. And I've definitely gotten feedback. I'm fortunate to have great mentors and others who are invested in my success. And at times, I think decisions I've made are ways that I've handled staff issues or challenges that were really putting the person before the company. People have been like, why? That, how does that meet your bottom line? And I think that just the way I'm oriented as a person is just not how I work. And to be frank, I've actually questioned myself as a leader, because I'm like, well, am I supposed to be more cutthroat, and am I supposed to be, to be more, this way or that way? And so I've been on, I often joke with people that being an entrepreneur is like being in therapy every day, and all of your issues get laid out for everyone, and everything that you're working through kind of gets laid out, because I've had to really grapple a lot with what is my definition of leadership, and what are the models that I've been taught versus the kind of leader I actually want to be. And I think that, going back to your first question to me, part of the reason I made the decision to go out on my own was because even though I couldn't articulate it yet, I knew there was things I wanted to do differently that may not be supported in the structures that I was in. And it still sometimes feels maybe unnatural given, the way that we define success often. But I do think that this idea, particularly COVID in the last year or plus, has uncovered this, that we have to, as leaders, really see our teams as whole people. We have to really think about what's going on outside of the time that they're with us. I still grapple with the in-person versus virtual piece. I mean, again, I'm building a community. And so, but I put it on myself as a leader to think about how can I still make sure my people are connected to me and to each other, even in a virtual space, because people have, like me, I want to do yoga at noon, and have the flexibility to do that. And so, yeah, I think, for me, it is about this building community piece, the compassion piece, and hopefully we can continue to have more spaces where we also support each other as we're trying to maybe shift our leadership, because I don't think it's leading in that way is supported. I know leading in this way is not fully supported, in the way that we've probably all been taught.
Sheena, I agree with you, and I want to be like you. I'm still trying to figure out how to do yoga at noon. But one is that we have had to revisit, I think, Anne, you can comment on this too, how we think about the partnership between organizational life and well-being of the people who work there. It's not only Anne's organization that owns our self-care, our well-being, and our health. And so, and even with my students, we're trying to teach about owning well-being throughout your life course. The other thing is, Sheena, my team knows community is one of my favorite words. And part of a leader's job. Leaders wear many hats. This year, all of us have had to be crisis leaders, but we've also had to be community conveners. And coming together in community to accomplish our goals and to support each other are so important. And then building upon that, this is why I love this panel is, and including Linda, it's not only our organization being in community, but serving the communities we sit in are so important. So when I think of Simmons, it's the Boston community, it's higher education, it's K-12. And, I'm not just here to lead Simmons, I got to give back to the community. And that's really a new model of leadership, how each of our organizations and foundation can really be a force for good from where we sit and give back to the communities that we care about. And that's something that, 20 years ago when I taught leadership to MBA students, I didn't teach, but now I would teach.
And Lynn, I would just say to those great points, it's so ironic that, a healthcare system or providers needs to think about the health and the wellness of their employees. Like, of course, isn't that part of health? So it is really interesting that we see a focus now on the totality of all health of patients, whether it's social determinants of health. Yes, we all know this. You can't see a person, a patient, an employee out of context. You have to think about the context of their lives, their families, where they live, and 100 other factors to really understand what's going on and see things from other people's perspective, which then brings me to the other point, which is a lot of leadership is understanding different perspectives. So, I find a lot of times when I speak to people in leadership, they are hearing the same thing from the same senior leaders who are saying very much the same thing. You have to get beyond that and think about within a small organization, a medium organization, whatever organization, if you're really going to take care of people, and Sheena, this gets to the compassion and what it is you're really trying to create within an organization, you have to talk to multiple people in an organization. And I can just say, at times I've learned the most valuable things from people I just run into in a hallway who are doing very, very different things from what anyone is talking about. But getting various perspectives and really understanding what that means for whatever it is you're trying to do, that's one of the single most valuable things, because otherwise you do get a very, very narrow perspective, which is not particularly healthy, I'll use that word writ large, or valuable to do what any of us want to do in terms of why we're doing the jobs we're doing.
Andrea, I'll get that last question to you, and then unfortunately we have to wrap it up.
Yes, I'm going to be real quick. So when I graduated from business school in 1992, we were told in no uncertain terms that our job was to, if in the private sector, focus on shareholder returns. It never made sense to me. I didn't accept it then. And now we've seen things have changed to stakeholders. Employees are probably your number one stakeholder. So I'll just leave that at that. Thank goodness we've gotten out of that, but we need to keep reminding ourselves, because still a lot of CEOs are really thinking about shareholder returns. They may be saying stakeholders, but are they doing it? Number two, I was also told that my career should be learn, earn, return. Now I jumped quite quickly into return, quote return. I love what I do. I'm in philanthropy and I was in nonprofit. Nothing could be more incorrect. Learn, earn, return. People, employees want purpose. And again, that is even doubled down on after this pandemic. And that's employees. I loved, Anne, to hear about you talking to someone bumping into the hallway. One of the pieces of work that we did was helping schools feed all their children breakfast. And one of the schools came to us and they said, we can't do it. The janitors are against it. We don't want it. It would be breakfast in the classroom. That's the only way to get all the kids fed after the school bell. The janitor said, it's going to be a mess. So I said, bring the janitors into the conversation and let them know these kids are hungry. These are low-income kids who aren't getting breakfast. And you know what? The janitors became the number one proponents of this program because they wanted purpose and they cared about these kids. And I think that that just so illustrates that everybody at every level within an organization, an employer, everybody wants purpose. And more so after this terrible tragedy, where most of us have lost people we know, and we're not going to go back to the old way of doing things.
I wish we could keep going because the four of you collectively just have individually and collectively are just shedding so much light. If I could do a tiny bit of justice to what we talked about, there was a really great conversation about learning and having a learning growth mindset, and that we are all lifelong learners, especially as leaders, and that you're instead of having a career, you're having a profession with a flexible career. And when you're running your organization, you need to focus on what you're actually trying to achieve, not just the structures that you had in order to achieve it before. You don't just need to have a conference or a meeting or a business trip. Look at what the actual outcome is. And that's a way of creating a more inclusive environment that rewards the actual outcomes and what you're trying to achieve. Flexibility is another thing that I heard. And the idea of what type of leadership that we need to have today, one that involves a lot more compassion, a lot more building of community, building an inclusive community where people can thrive and do their best work, looking at your colleagues as whole people, not just a person who's there between certain hours or working, accomplishing tasks, but as whole people and what their needs are. That you talked about the partnership of well-being in work, that well-being is a life journey for all of us. And understanding different perspectives as well as this broader purpose, which I think we all hear is even in mission-oriented organizations like the ones that you all have, there's a step beyond that. We're showing that there is a social responsibility that your organization has and adheres to. And doing all of this with these women leaders in creating a space where all people can thrive in their environments is really, really exciting and inspiring to hear. So thank you all. This has been a really, really remarkable conversation.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks.
So I'm going to ask the next panel, we're going to continue this. If the next panel could turn on their screens, we are going to go to the next conversation. We're going to take what we talked about and take it into sort of these ideas of what they are, and bring it into the actual how do we do it. So this panel work we call the tactical steps to change the system and realize the opportunity. And so I'm excited to introduce 4 more inspiring thought leaders in the business community. First, I'd like to welcome Judy Habib, founder and CEO of KHJ Brand Activation and president of the Massachusetts Women's Forum. We're also joined by Rebecca, who is CEO of Optum Behavioral Health, Addie Schwartz, the CEO of Reach Higher, and Corey Thomas, the CEO of Rapid7. Thank you all so much for being here with us today and sharing your expertise and experience. I'm going to start this conversation with Addie. You have more than a decade of experience of getting women back into the workforce. What support do women need to stay? This is sort of the tactical of, okay, you're getting people in, but what do these leaders who are here joining us today, how can they make them not have to go through that process?
Thanks so much, Linda, and everyone here on the panel for having me. I think it's such a great question because, we can talk and talk about all the problems, but without having concrete solutions, can we move the needle further for women and solve some of these problems? So if you take a step back, what's shocking is that historically 30% of women who leave the workforce don't ever return. And the ones that do, only 40% are able to come back to full-time jobs. So, and then there's not enough women that we know they're even getting to that first level of promotion. So women are starting at about the same levels as men, and then they're actually falling behind quickly and never catching up. So I feel like that career breaks, and I spent a lot of time on this, nearly a decade, they can't derail women. And we know women take time off to do, to have children, to take care of ill parents, to take care of themselves. There is a war on talent. And we also know that diversity drives innovation and profitability, which is what we learned in our last panel. Linda, you asked, how do we create environments where women can thrive? And I would say, and where they can have a sense of belonging, where they can feel psychologically safe, and where they can feel greater engagement and purpose in the mission, something I think that Andrea said. And I believe that it's, an obligation. We can't move the needle for women one at a time. And that's a big lesson that I've learned in the last almost decade of my work on Reach Higher. We need to tackle getting more women into companies, and we need to get more women to stay in companies together and move up. And companies have a really important role in helping all of us feel more connected to the organization. We actually developed a tool and have taken technology to the next level. Here we are with COVID and the pandemic, and we're all using Zoom. But what happens in between the Zoom meetings? What happens? How do you connect people? How do you make people feel like they are part of something bigger than just their individual job? And other than you being able to raise your hand on Zoom or clap virtually, which sometimes you're clapping and you don't even hear the sound. So I feel like that we need to have disruptions, and we need technology to do more for us than just have Zoom. That means creating small teams of women in companies that are across the organization that can allow them to learn from each other, have them be on a guided journey together so that they actually can have a safe space to talk about things that they're dealing with. Yes, women need different supports, and we need to think differently about it. We need to disrupt the environment in order to do that. They also need expert guidance. We've talked here about mentors and role models and sponsors, but if the organizations at the top don't have enough women, how are those few women going to be sprinkled around to all the women that are joining the workforce at equal rates as men? It's not possible. So, the innovations that we've done in this new platform have been very helpful to companies that we've worked with in Massachusetts. And if you look at Massachusetts and the companies, there's biotech, engineering, IT, so many organizations that are so male dominated. We need to help women stay together, thrive, and move. And in the work that we've done, we've seen in those companies like Analog Devices, like iRobot, and like Vertex, we've really seen that 90% of employees that are these women in these groups going along a journey with a vetted executive and having a digital platform to get advice from 24/7, that they feel more committed to their companies, that they feel more committed to making development a priority, and they have built their confidence. So I feel like we need to think about technology differently, and we need to leverage it, and we need to think about just ways of disrupting.
Great. Those are great points. Thanks, Addie. So, Rebecca, we're talking a bit about how women who are I was talking about how we get more women into the workplace, but for the women that are there, we're seeing unprecedented levels of stress. And you have some really interesting data on the stress that people have been going through. Can you share with us what you've learned?
Thank you, Linda. Happy to do that. And I do think it's important to understand the unprecedented impact that the current circumstances have put particularly on women. And let me share a couple of sobering statistics. And I do think it'll help to tie into some of the very specific initiatives that you're going to see many employers and many of our organizations take up going forward in support of women. You heard in the earlier panel that over 4 million women left the job market. The more sobering statistic for me was if you look at September 2020, of the 1.1 million who exited the job market, 80% were women, right at the time when school resumed. That to me is a sobering statistic. The other thing that was just recently published by the Kaiser Family Foundation was that 51% of women said that the pandemic had impacted their mental health compared to 34% of men. And a fifth of those women said that that impact was major. So not only do we have an economic impact here, we have an impact on the mental well-being of women. And we actually see that in much of the data that we look at as a behavioral health coverage company. We've seen an 8% increase in net new patients seeking outpatient psychotherapy. And actually, the highest increase we see in outpatient care and the highest growth area is female adolescents. We've seen a 45% increase in adolescent females seeking outpatient care for anxiety and 31% increase for depression. The other statistic I would share with you is how it impacts the workforce, particularly the workforce in healthcare. You heard this from Ann Klebanski as well. In healthcare, 69% of the workforce is female. Actually, in my unit at Optum, 81% of my workforce is female. So this is personal. These are the folks that I work with every day that are helping others for their mental health. And in a recent survey of psychiatrists, 78% of the participants had high levels of burnout. That's staggering. That's absolutely staggering. And 16% of them had major depressive disorder. And that burnout is particularly acute with female clinicians and African-American practitioners. And so there are populations that have been disproportionately impacted here. The good news is that many of these folks are seeking and getting help. So as I look at the advent of telehealth and telemental health, we talk about Zoom as a way to engage with your teams, but it also has been an amazing modality in the healthcare space and in the telemental health space in particular. If anyone had told me a year and a half ago that we would go from 1% to 2% of all outpatient therapy being delivered on teleplatforms to what has turned out to be in some cases 75%, wow. I would have said there's no way. Well, guess what? We did it. Whole treatment modalities got changed and got delivered that way. And interestingly, 63% of all telemental health was for female patients. So the good news is the women that have been impacted are seeking help. The other interesting statistic, I actually shared this during the preparation for this call, is for employee assistance programs, these are typically benefits that are provided by employers, we find that 66% of those calling in are women. So the good news is that they're seeking help. We do see a little bit of the reduction of the stigma, but there's a lot more for us to do. And I'm looking forward to the discussion when we talk about how employers are extending and changing their benefits and extending into that world of wellness, how we're thinking of extending care with digital and what we call care delivery extenders like peer groups, and also talk about cultural competency and how that is going to become part of the fabric. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. Corey, your organization has really done incredible work to be a successful, high-performing company that is also a place that allows more people to thrive. What do organizations like yours have to do to support women? Hearing what you've heard about women leaving the workforce, especially, and the amount of stress that women are feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say, one, I've learned a lot, and it's been incredibly distressing to both hear it, but also see it firsthand. And talk, at Rep7, we have some women who are actually trying to figure out sort of like how to actually balance it. So, I just spoke with someone who's taking a sabbatical recently to actually they just needed space and they needed some time. And so it's just one of those things that I would say is just incredibly, incredibly difficult. To get back to the root of your question, look, I think we're still learning. I think if I was going to actually put into a category of the thing that's created progress, but the thing that we still struggle with the most is that, many times you actually have an idea of sort of like success, performance. You have all these hard measures and hard drivers that you have to achieve. And we're a very audacious company. I think what's difficult, though, is that you don't know which things that you have to do that actually drive the success that you're looking for, and which things are just arbitrary. The analogy that I use is to say that, the last 10 Boston Marathon winners wore Nikes. Therefore, the only way to win the marathon is you have to wear Nikes. Of course, that's stupid and that's arbitrary. But, in business, we have a lot of those sort of like arbitrary things that actually says that, like, you have to be in the office, you have to have FaceTime. We had one that we had to confront early on, which was this notion that in sales, people actually had to actually travel unpredictable schedules to see customers. And it turned out that wasn't true, but boy, was that a hard thing to deprogram, to say that you can create something that wasn't true. And there was no easy way to know which ones of those are true versus not. And so I think that part of what we have to do on an ongoing basis is not take norms for granted, that it's the only way to create success and to drive performance. We have to be willing to challenge them and try them, especially if those norms hold people back or are disruptive or create damage to groups of people who could be highly, highly impactful if you didn't have an arbitrary norm in place. And I think that's the explorations work. Specifically, the ones that we've actually won are a lot about time, travel, and flexibility, which are the ones that actually come up time and time again. And so those are just some examples.
I think that I really like what you're saying, because you're saying that too often things just continue because that's the way that they're done. So it's almost like you have to take an entrepreneurial lens to each department and each sort of function as well, and evaluate what are we actually trying to do. And just because this is the way we do it, we did in the past, is this the way that we're doing it going forward? And that's where you create an environment that has the flexibility and the time that more people need.
Yes, I mean, it is, and I would say that, like, I wish I had a recipe for it, but it's just something, it's just work you have to be willing to do, and you get some right, you get some wrong.
You know, that's really interesting. And that brings us to you, Judy. You work with so many different organizations. You run an organization yourself, but you're in the Spanish Point where you serve on boards and you consult with and support so many different organizations. Based on what you've been hearing, there's really an important role for leadership in creating this. What do you see as the role for leadership?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be in the conversation, and thank you to Deloitte, Janet, and you, Linda. I've heard it said that if you want a different future, have a different conversation. So thank you for leading this. And the second comment is I was just thinking about and getting ready for today's discussion with the topic, the future is female. The good news is that we are so all oriented or reoriented to the notion of inclusion that one of my first things, and I was talking to some people in my company, the future is female. So Mike, how does that make you feel as we talk about the future is female? And it was a really interesting conversation, but it makes me feel like I want to say the future is female and in color. And when I just sort of thought about that for myself, it I think is a sign of the time that we are in, as I think Andrea had said, we're at such an inflection point. And that will bring me to, I think, my response to what do I see as the role of leadership? The best leaders that we've observed in our company, which at KHJ, we have this opportunity to be with people at a moment of change, at a moment of possibility. And what I would tell you is the common denominator of great leaders is the courage to be in the I don't know. It truly is those leaders who are willing to, and Corey just heard that from you. You obviously are leading an extremely successful company, and you just have to be up close and personal and comfortable with being uncomfortable in the I don't know. We heard it from Sheena. It is the one thing that is the red thread, if you will, from startup, which once upon a time I was, to Fortune 50. It's Warren Buffett. It's those leaders who say, hold on a minute. It's time to make a change from being so completely, and Corey, again, I'm just picking up on what you just said. We're so oriented in business to being attached to the outcome. And the outcome is the bottom line. It's the financials. It's the earnings per share per quarter. And what is shifting societally is that purpose matters. You know, we would say to our clients, millennials aren't just a segment that we approach in a media target. Millennial is a mindset today, and that mindset is really purpose driven. So it's had us take what had traditionally been exclusively devotion to messaging and marketing and communications to customers, and now we do this thing called brand inside, because to the point of, it's not just shareholders, it's stakeholders. Stakeholder number one is the employees. And as we look at what's happening, and as we have been in the experience of what's happening for ourselves, for our clients, it's a different game that we're playing now. And there is a new contract between employer and employee. It's a whole new game. It's a whole new contract. And I think it's a good thing. And it has me feel to some degree a kind of optimism that while this pandemic has been a big step back for women and for many, it also is, I think, the opportunity for 2 steps forward, because we have all been in the collective business and societal, I don't know. So we have now been in this place of a co-created, very dynamic, very evolutionary and organic co-creation of a future. And I mean, how great is that? So I think that, the wisdom is leader, transform thyself, be willing to be uncomfortable. And if you can do that with yourself, you can do that with your colleagues, you can do that with your employees, and just be open to a collective solution. I think the only other thing that would occur for me to share is that in that new contract, it's a sort of interesting juxtaposition of 2 things. One is real clarity, in the midst of that we're so confused and we don't know. There's a requirement to be clear about what are the expectations relative to performance as it to every job in an organization. And the other side is, and what is the creativity with which we can personally support you to fulfill on that promise of performance? It's a really interesting thing that is a both and. It's a real both and to be super clear on here's what the job is and here's what's expected. Do you promise to deliver on that? Because our promise to you is to give you the kind of creative support that really helps you deliver in your life in a way that works for you. So it's a really fascinating juxtaposition of clarity and creativity.
So it's almost like there's 2 aspects, right? There's what can we do inside our companies? And I think part of what we're hearing is that creating an environment that is willing, that's not afraid, to use the word courage, to look at what's going on and empowering employees who are looking for that purpose and they want to work at a company that they're an organization that they're proud of. And the leadership that takes, and we have the information around that. But then there's also this external factor in terms of how are we changing the system? What, as business leaders, do we need to also advocate for, or what do we need to look at that's outside of our grounds, outside of the domain of the organization that we can, affect some change in? What else do we need to be looking at?
If I could jump in, the thing that you triggered in describing that, actually, Judy, that was very well said, and Linda, the way you juxtaposed that. But one of the things that I think a lot of us are taking in from the outside is, as a result of this pandemic, it actually has shifted our view of how fast we can move and how flexible we can be. We, like many organizations, had to shift capacity from areas where there was no longer a need for it to, for example, standing up whole sets of groups to be able to answer 911 calls for entire cities and counties where they needed extra capacity. And so we redeployed tens of thousands of clinicians to move them from what their current role was to actually these new roles. And you heard that a little bit in the previous panel around that ability to do it and that ability to do it fast. And to Corey's point, the true north was very clear. And there was a lot of the things that were norms that, well, you have to go do this, and you have to get sign off there. They actually fell by the wayside. And so we're trying very, very hard to bring that flexibility, that speed, and hang on to the good aspects of this, because it allows us to get product to market, help people, empower our employees to make decisions, and not reverse back and ossify back to some of the things that were there that we realized, well, maybe it kept our folks from doing their best work and interacting with the marketplace. So I don't know if that resonates with the other panelists, but that certainly was one of the key lessons. And when I speak to a lot of the frontline folks, particularly in behavioral, that ability to be empowered, to help that person in need and have the ability to say, wait a second, you have a housing problem. I'm going to get that done first, and that will help me make sure you get to your treatment and are adherent to your medication, and giving them the power to say, hey, let me put you in touch with some housing authorities that we can help you do this. That's been transformational.
Linda, one of the things that when you talk about systemic change that I think is worth noting, and this is not going to be an overnight win, but I believe it will be. And I think you may recall that last year, Massachusetts Women's Forum, at the leadership of Evelyn Murphy, launched something called Wage Equity Now. And and it's now, hopefully, will be making its way through legislation. But what that's about is to have organizations with employees over 100 be accountable for what their wage statistics are, comparing average salaries for men, women, white, Blacks, other minority populations, to really, and talk about being uncomfortable, to just say, here are all of the men, all of the women, by race, and here are the average salaries. What it really highlights, this is not just an equal pay for equal work, it really highlights also the power and hierarchy in organizations. Those early statistics are not going to be pretty. They're going to be really uncomfortable. But when we talk about leadership, is the willingness to be uncomfortable. Well, so what if that percentage is horrific? What matters is how you're moving it. And I think that is probably one of the most, I love the expression, visibility is accountability. And that's probably one of the most significant things that will move the system.
Corey, a question actually came in from the audience for you specifically. And this person asked, sometimes it is harder for younger females to have these conversations with their male managers who may not understand these gender-specific challenges. How do you recommend navigating these difficult conversations?
Well, that is 100% true. We've done our own both surveys and conversations. And in fact, I'll use our sales team, for example, is that we had people who were doing great, having great sort of like careers, and they would actually, some would leave, some wouldn't. And it turned out one of the triggers was one of the things I talked about, sort of like travel, sort of like was one of those things earlier on. But one of the other triggers was the fact that like I was navigating some life change and I did not have a manager who's empathetic to me or my needs. And so it's a very real thing. The advice that I would actually give is sort of is sort of like twofold in some natures. Is one, I think it's incumbent upon companies. So I'm always cautious to say that it's not just the people, but it's incumbent upon the organizations, but then also the person to actually have a rich set of advisors. And I think companies and organizations have to facilitate that. I think people have to pursue it also. I'm not a big believer in the Yoda-like mentorship model where there's like one single like mentor. And so whether I'm coaching sort of like, Black executives or aspiring people younger in their career or women, you want to build an ecosystem. So, women need other women in different levels that they can actually talk to, but they should also have men in their network and in their ecosystem that they should talk to. So that's one sort of element, sort of to have a rich ecosystem of advisors to navigate sort of like career and change, because having people you can talk to really, really matters. And in fact, I think that's a big part of what I found that makes something inclusive is sort of like, do I have people that I can just use as sounding boards in non-judgmental ways? And so that's one element. I think, my personal take is that for organizations, the onus is on us is to have trusted professionals in fields like we call it people strategy or HR, but there are truly strategic advisors about how to navigate careers versus, I would say, operationally focused and aligned with the managers. And so we try to create some independence within our people strategy team where they're just really trying to figure out how do we develop talent for the organization. And that's its own independent power center that does sort of like challenge and push managers and operational leaders and executives. And what we found over time is you actually had to have that balancing effect, because I would love to tell you, this is not true at Rep7, I don't know if it's true at any company, that all managers sort of like have the maturity perspective and know how to act in all situations. It's just not true. You're going to have variability. And what I believe is what you don't want to have is it's single threaded, where basically that manager ends up being the, not just the boss, but the judge and jury for things that actually happen. And so you want to have a system that's somewhat balanced. And so, my advice is to develop a broad network of advisors, but for the companies, I think it's key that you actually have really sort of like outside perspectives that are trusted advisors that people can talk to.
Yeah, Linda, I would love to jump in here and say, like just what Corey was saying, if you look at the data, it shows that like 3 out of every 4 senior leaders is male. And so you're always going to have those situations until we fix the pipeline and we get more women at different levels and in groups, we're not going to fix that, some of that difficult conversation that may stop women in their tracks in terms of getting, promoted. I think that what Janet said earlier is we just all need to think differently about how we have all these amazing women that have done so much in their career so far, entering the workforce in these great companies that stall out. And we need to drive them to success. We need to drive them to success together with peers, just like Corey said. We need to overlay a layer of leadership that they might not have access to that can provide that support. And we need to provide them a safe place that allows them to feel psychologically safe and feel that they belong and that they can ask questions and help their careers grow and thrive. And we need this not only, and Judy, you said this perfectly, we need this not only for women, but for every underrepresented group that can't make it through corporate America. If you look at the statistics for women of color, it's significantly worse than women in general. And so we do need to think differently. Companies have a stake in this. And I firmly believe, and from all the experience from companies we've worked with across the country, you know what? There's a war on talent. And women who represent so much potential, they're going to leave. They're going to walk. They'll go to either more flexible environments that they can figure out how to make work and their life fit together, or they'll start their own businesses. And so why do we want that brain drain to happen, right? We want to invest in our women. We want the people to grow and thrive, and we need to do things differently and move the needle in order to make that happen. So as Janet said, we really need to help drive the women to the top. And we need to know what we know that are the supports, flexible opportunity. We got to fix that pay gap, and we got to provide the team orientation to help each other.
You bring up a really good point. I'm going to go to you, Rebecca, in a second. But companies that don't understand that in order to thrive, you really need to have a variety of leaders, that you need a variety of perspectives, or you're not going to make it. Those companies are going to get left behind. So the ones that understand that, the tactical thing that we're talking about here is that you really need diverse leaders in positions of power, not just sort of lower, but they actually need to be in decision-making positions so that they can have influence, bring these perspectives and different experiences in to make it. And that's true for everyone at the company to really build that inclusive, thriving organization. Rebecca.
The only other thought I wanted to add here is I like the concept, Judy, of, I don't know, and having that willingness and that humility to adapt and change. And so, for example, thinking through a different set of benefits around childcare than many employers have historically. We're seeing them completely reconsider that. Rethinking mental health resources, rethinking when you ask for help, rethinking mentorship programs, even rethinking, what are the resources we put to employees under difficult circumstances? I'll give you an example. As the COVID pandemic was happening, we realized that a lot of our employees who are frontline employees were being put under very difficult circumstances, in some cases putting their own life at risk to be able to take care of others in order to help. And so we we repackaged a bunch of capabilities, brought in a bunch of capabilities, and created something called Love for the Front Line. And the idea was, what are the things we can do? It was very simple things. It was like, hey, can we give you almost like a fast pass when you go grocery shopping so you can be in and out of the store? Can we give you free Lyft rides? Can we give you free hotel rooms if you need to stay away from your family for whatever reason overnight? And these are things that, frankly, in all humility, would have never thought of. But as employees came to us, I think we need this. We had the foresight to say, you know what, this is a great idea. Let's let it happen. And so that ability to be flexible and to adjust, I do think is something we want to carry forward, particularly as Addie, you point out, we are in the war for talent. The fact is, I happen to be in the position of 80% of my workforce is virtual. I can hire clinicians as long as they're licensed. I serve clients all over North America. And so the ability to have people in the community that are helping folks with their care is actually, turns out quite an advantage.
Well, and one thing that you're saying, Rebecca, that I think is really important, and the whole point of this panel is about tactical solutions. We have to, as a society, think about not lip service, not checking the box. It's no longer checking the box. We keep looking at the data and the data looks the same. And a lot of effort and a lot of energy, but we need to think differently. We need to take action. And we know what the different levers are, but we need to come up with solutions that are different, that try different things and move the needle. Because without that, we're going to be looking at the same charts and the same stats for a long time. Great. Meanwhile, more than 60% of the women that are graduating from college and advanced degrees are going into the workforce. And then they're, and what large portions of them are leaving. So we're not doing anything more for ourselves than we were before.
One of the things that you're talking about in terms of this flexibility and offering more, it's almost like we're talking about the internal versus the external. And it's almost like that companies, what we saw during this pandemic was a lot of the structures that we rely on collapsed. And so there's more that we have to do to support people within our organizations in a way that we just never thought was our problem before. Mm-hmm. That we're going to pay our taxes and that's what takes care of it. But we've realized that we can't rely on that anymore, and that we have to think about things about childcare, about time off, these sorts of things. I don't know if Judy or Corey, you want to respond to that.
Yeah, I would. The comment I'd make about that is it underscores the importance of an organization doing a really good job understanding for itself, not just its customers, but its people. What are you really up to? What purpose are you serving in the world? What value and contribution are you bringing to the world? And to really do a good job to connect your people to your purpose. Because if that's a foundational connection, then from there, you can confidently say, then I'm taking care of you so you can help take care of what we're trying to do together. That's the sort of new contract. And that's why it's so critical for organizations to really be authentically connected to, brand used to be about how are we marketing to make sales. Today, it's about what do you stand for, authentically so, that is bringing value to the world such that value comes back. And when you can really clearly articulate that to yourself and to the world, most importantly, to your employees, because if they can feel that connection, then guess what? Now you have a foundation, and now you have a contract where let us take care of you and you're going to take care of our customers. And that's how it flies. I think it's really, really critical to make that connection.
And make that connection, and Judy, and have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I will say that the tenor, and I see Addie is smiling as well, the tenor of some of the conversations that I've had with clients, with regulators, with employees has changed. It has changed. I actually think it's made us all better humans.
Well, and that's part of why, to your point, it can't be just a head thing. It's not a theory. The point is to programmatically, intentionally have the conversation, get your story right for yourself, and then tell your story to yourself, to your internal people, and then to your external people. It's absolutely a very intentional conversation and connection. And I think it's a very great thing because it's now getting us to the kind of society that we all want to live in, which is, what are you bringing forward to the world? And to the extent that you're bringing value, value will come back. Now, what's the contract between the organizer of that value, i.e. the employer, and the employee who's going to deliver it?
Corey, you were about to say something.
Yeah, so one, I completely agree with the comments. One of the things that I'm trying, that at least I'm trying to figure out, is what the pandemic's pointed out is, you know, you can spend a lot of tech companies spend a lot of money on benefits, for example. So to Rebecca's point earlier about, so like, what are you providing? The thing that I think sort of like stood out in two ways to me was that while we provided lots of benefits, we didn't really have a way to think about sort of like, hey, what do people need at different stages of life? And how do those things start to diverge? And how do you make sure that you're actually paying attention to your employee base as a whole, but also you have some ability to actually say, like, what are the different needs of different people inside of the employee base and inside of the organization? And so there's this whole life transition thing that we're trying to add that actually goes beyond the traditional things that we actually think about benefits, of which healthcare, I mean, not healthcare, of which that's always been a big thing, but even that's a life thing. But childcare is the most obvious thing that we tend to talk about. The other thing that was reflected, and this is completely non-quantitative in orientation, is I was going back through some of my notes over the last, over the last couple of years for sort of like promotions and sort of people that were being promoted. And we've done an improving job of making sure that we are actually moving people through the pipeline. The thing that made this whole childcare thing stand out before is at no point in time when we were having a promotion discussion with a male that the discussion or conversation come up about time or travel or any of these other things. It was just presumed that it was actually there. In many of the discussions that I actually had with women, they proactively brought up the concerns about, like, what are the expectations around this? And what made it stand out to me, and this goes back to this sort of like, like you have to be you have to be constantly innovating and experimenting, but you got to make sure that the people that are having the conversations are really attentive. Because if you actually have someone that actually sends the wrong signals in that conversation, it is massively discouraging. And so it's both the big programmatic things, but it's also those little things that end up mattering so much.
I am so sad that I have to stop this conversation, but we have our wonderful mayor is here with us. If I could do a quick summary, because I actually really learned a lot. My thinking is changing because of this conversation. So I'm really grateful to all of you. And one of the things that I'm hearing is that Corey, what you were just saying is that there has to be a consistency throughout the organization in terms of what your purpose, what your intentions are, and what your approach is to having this inclusive environment. And Judy, you really brought home how it's you really need to have your social responsibility, your social values clear internally, and then you can bring it out externally. And you need that alignment. And Rebecca and Addie, you were sort of bringing in this also this idea on the support, the purpose and mission of the organization, people really wanting that, and meeting your employees where they are. There's more to think about in terms of what we expected government, society, communities to provide versus what the expectation is now on, and the need, not the expectations, wrong word, but what the need is for companies to think differently about that and think that they need to be part of the solution on these things. And this is where early childhood education, childcare in general, health services, all of these other outside systems impact the ability for companies to do business. And so for changing the system and having a tactical way of women being successful in the workforce, it takes a combination of all of these. So thank you all so much for learning, for allowing us all to learn together. And these conversations are not meant to be the end. There's just, we need to keep having these conversations so that we collectively learn and come up with solutions that work for everyone. And so now, before we conclude the event, please welcome Mayor Kim Janey she's here to provide some closing remarks. Mayor Janey is an exciting groundbreaker as the first Black, first woman mayor of Boston. In 2017, she was elected to the Boston City Council in a historic election, becoming the first woman to represent District 7. In 2020, she became president of the most diverse city council in Boston's history. Welcome, Mayor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. It is a pleasure to be here. I also want to thank Janet and Deloitte for sponsoring this event, and certainly to all of the panelists. It is very clear from this powerful discussion and the amazing women featured here that the future definitely is female. And I am here as living proof in history, sitting before you as the first woman mayor to say definitely that the future is female. This city is so blessed to have rich talent, diverse rich talent of amazing women of all walks of life who contribute so much. And I have been blessed just in my 8 weeks as mayor to appoint new women to leadership positions in my cabinet. A number of new cabinet positions are being led by women. And it's just a testament to the amazing strength and resilience here in our city and the talent in our city. It certainly does not mean that our work is done. However, we know that there's a lot more work to do in ensuring women have a seat at the table, a voice in all of the discussions that impact our lives. And so I'm just grateful to lead the city at a time such as this. It is an incredible city of Boston, certainly unprecedented challenges, but I remain encouraged in large part because of the women who are doing great things, whether as nonprofit leaders or universities or hospitals or our cultural institutions. They're just entrepreneurs, so many amazing women doing great things. And so I just want to cap off this event by saying grateful to everyone for their contributions. We have a lot of work to do in terms of ensuring an equitable recovery, reopening, and renewal in our city. I don't aspire to take us back to normal. I know we all want to move forward and get on with our lives, but normal was hurting too many people and leaving too many people behind, including women. And so, we have an opportunity now to create a stronger Boston, a Boston that's more equitable, just, and resilient, and a Boston where women have a seat at the table. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Linda. It's been an amazing discussion and look forward to continuing to work with all of you in the future.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much for being part of this, Mayor. And thank you to all of our panelists. Like I said, I learned a lot and I look forward to this conversation continuing. Thank you all.